പ്രാർത്ഥിക്കാം. ഞങ്ങളെ സ്നേഹിക്കുന്ന ദൈവമേ, ഞങ്ങളുടെ സ്വർഗീയ പിതാവേ, തിരുസന്നിധിയിലേക്ക് ഞങ്ങൾ നന്ദിയോടെ അടുത്തു വരുന്നു. ഇന്ന് പകലിൽ ഞങ്ങൾക്ക് ഒരുമിച്ച് തിരുസന്നിധിയിലായിരിക്കാൻ അങ്ങയുടെ മുഖത്തേക്ക് നോക്കുവാൻ അങ്ങ് തന്ന നല്ല അവസരത്തിന് സ്തുതി സ്തോത്രം. ഇടവകയുടെ സേവികാ സംഘമായി പ്രിയപ്പെട്ട നിന്റെ മക്കൾ അങ്ങയുടെ സ്ഥലത്തിലേക്ക് അടുത്ത് വരുമ്പോൾ ദൈവമേ, നീ കൂടെ ഇരുന്ന് പരിപാലിക്കുന്നതിന് സ്തോത്രം. ഇടവകയ്ക്ക് വേണ്ടി പ്രാർത്ഥിക്കുവാൻ, തലമുറകളെ ഓർത്ത് കരയുവാൻ, ഞങ്ങളുടെ രാജ്യത്തെ ഞങ്ങളുടെ ചുറ്റുപാടുകളെയൊക്കെ ഓർത്ത് കർത്താവെ തിരുസന്നിധിയിൽ അർപ്പിപ്പാൻ ഇതിൻ്റെ മക്കളെ നീ സഹായിക്കുന്ന നന്ദിയോട് സ്തോത്രം. ദൈവമേ, ഇന്ന് ഞങ്ങൾ ഒരുമിച്ച് അടുത്ത് വരുമ്പോൾ നിൻ്റെ സാന്നിധ്യം ഞങ്ങളോട് കൂടെ ഉണ്ടായിരിക്കണമേ. ഞങ്ങൾ സംസാരിക്കുമ്പോൾ, ഞങ്ങൾ കർത്താവെ ചിന്തിക്കുമ്പോൾ, പല കാര്യങ്ങൾ ഞങ്ങൾ ഇന്ന് ചെയ്യാൻ ആഗ്രഹിക്കുമ്പോഴൊക്കെ നിൻ്റെ കൃപയും സാന്നിധ്യം ഉണ്ടാകണം. ഇത് ഞങ്ങളുടെ എല്ലാവരുടെയും ഒരുമിച്ചുള്ള വളർച്ചയ്ക്കും ഞങ്ങളുടെ ജീവിതത്തിൻ്റെ നന്മയ്ക്കും ഞങ്ങളുടെ കൂട്ടായ്മയ്ക്കും ഞങ്ങളുടെ ഇടവകയുടെ വളർച്ചയ്ക്കും ഒക്കെ ആക്കി തീർക്കണമേ. നേതൃത്വം നൽകുന്ന എല്ലാവരെയും ഞങ്ങളുടെ കരങ്ങളിലേക്ക് തരുന്നു കർത്താവെ, നീ കാത്തു സൂക്ഷിക്കണമേ. നിൻ്റെ മക്കൾക്ക് കൊടുത്തിരിക്കുന്ന അവസരങ്ങൾക്കായി സ്തോത്രം. അവസരങ്ങളെ കർത്താവെ പങ്കിടുവാൻ, അനുഭവങ്ങളെ, അറിവിനെ ഒക്കെ പങ്കിടുവാൻ നിൻ്റെ മക്കളെ സഹായിക്കുന്നതിന് സ്തോത്രം ചെയ്യുന്നു. ഇന്ന് ഞങ്ങളുടെ കുടിവരവിൽ അങ്ങയുടെ സാന്നിധ്യം ഉണ്ടാകണം. വന്നവരെയൊക്കെ നീ അനുഗ്രഹിക്കണമേ, വരുവാനുള്ളവരെ കൊണ്ടുവരുത്തണമേ. ഒരുമിച്ച് നിന്നെ മഹത്വപ്പെടുത്തുവാനും കർത്താവെ ഞങ്ങളെ നീ സഹായിക്കണം. ക്രിസ്തുയേശു നാമത്തിൽ പ്രാർത്ഥന കേൾക്കണമേ. സ്വാഗതം സെക്രട്ടറി.
Well, a very good morning to all of you, and I hope everybody will reach here on time so we can start our section very well. So it's all nice to see all of you after 2 years, because we took a big break. So it's nice at least this many people can be together for a one-day conference. So first of all, I would like to thank God Almighty for giving us an opportunity again to meet as a one-day conference, so I give him all our thanks and grace. So now I would like to welcome our dearest Achan, who was always an inspiration to do anything, and he was always a good guidance in all areas of our life. Now I welcome Achan on behalf of the Savior Sangham. We are very fortunate to have Dr. Shaji Philip, and our own member, and he is the keynote speaker today, and he is going to give us some valuable information that we all can use in our life. And also he brought his lovely wife Maria, so that is all nice of him to bring both of them to be here. So I welcome Dr. Shaji Philip and Maria on behalf of the Saviors. And I'm also grateful to have all of us today, and I welcome each one of you to our Savior Sangham conference after 2 years, and it will not be possible without all of you, you know that. And now I welcome all of you on behalf of the Savior Sangham. For you. So, and we have two presenters, skillful presenters today. One is Tina Philip, and you know all Tina. Tina is kind of a little new to our church, but everybody knows her for the last 1 year, Tina. And the second one is Anu Manoj, and she will be here only in the afternoon because she is also fighting with a cold. So I welcome both of you also on behalf of the Savior. So I'm going to make it short. Now I invite Dr. Shaji for his presentation. And today's schedule looks like now it is 10:30, and you may need 40 or 50 minutes, and then we have a short time for question and answers in case if you have asked him anything that you want. He's an endocrinologist, so we can get valuable information from him. So last 10 minutes we can use it for questions and answers. And also today's schedule looks like after that we all go downstairs, and that is Tina's presentation till lunchtime. She is going to give us a basics lessons on how to make macrame, and it looks like she did a good example for all of us. And I brought a macrame example that I had at home, and it is also downstairs. So that is after that we have lunch, our favorite lunch, and it is 12 to 1. In case if she takes a little more time, of course we can adjust. After 1 o'clock, after lunch, we will go into Anu's section, that is jewelry making with the paper and also cake decoration. And you can eat the cake that you decorate if you wish to. So here I am inviting Dr. Shaji for his presentation. Give it to Shaji at the time.
Yeah. So I actually was blessed with a very loud voice. Okay. So is that okay?
Yes, it's okay.
Yeah.
Hope you can hear.
Yeah. One thing that's not appreciated is when I use this loud voice in my own house. Then no one wants to hear it. But really work with that. Oh, yes.
Everybody, actually it's good.
Can you hear? Can you hear do that?
Oh.
It is not the mic.
That's okay.
Maybe you have to start over there.
Yeah, I can use this, no problem. Is this good? Okay. So, good morning. എനിക്ക് ഒത്തിരി സന്തോഷമുണ്ട് ഇന്ന് രാവിലെ വരാൻ നിങ്ങളോട് ഈ nutrition topics or health topics കുറിച്ച് സംസാരിക്കാൻ. I give a little introduction of myself first and my wife. I am here longer than you thought, probably. We moved to Seattle in 2012, so really for a decade we've been here, maybe a little bit longer than some of you, maybe not for many of you. ഞാൻ ഫിലഡൽഫിയയിലാണ് ജനിച്ചത്. മമ്മി ആദ്യം വന്ന് 1975, brought my dad in 1976. I have 2 older sisters. We're all settled all over the country. And I did all of my college, medical school in Philadelphia. Came 1 year here in Seattle for a research fellowship at the University of Washington. Honestly, I wasn't interested in research, but I needed a break, and I had a nice time. It was beautiful. Never had been to Seattle. Loved it. Then I got engaged to my beautiful wife, and moved to New York City. She was finishing law school, and so we lived in New York City for 3 years. Many of you may recall there was a recession, life had changed, people probably made moves all over the world for different reasons, and we decided to take an adventure here to Seattle. So in 2012, we had already one child, our daughter Janvi, and our second, and Maria was about 33 weeks pregnant. We moved here with our second, and because I was starting my fellowship at the University of Washington in endocrinology. So I finished that in 2014, and after that I joined at actually it was Group Health then, you might remember, and then it became Kaiser Permanente in 2017. And that's where I've been. My clinic is based in Seattle, although I come in, I don't know. Yeah, and I've been there since. We live right in Seattle. Downtown. Actually, it's not really downtown. We don't live in one of the towers. We live in a neighborhood of Seattle, Beacon Hill. So for those who are familiar, we are city people. I grew up in Philadelphia. Maria grew up in the urban areas of East Coast as well. And so we're very comfortable there. But it's been a wonderful, wonderful gift to come here, starting since January as the pandemic was coming down, and meeting a community of people that I grew up with. So we had a very old church in Philadelphia, now there's 5 or 6 churches in Philadelphia. And so I spent a lot of my time outside of the Marthoma Church as an adult, and it's a very valuable experience to meet Christians from all different types, but it's also been a very blessed experience to come back into our Malayali community here. And so I'm actually going to move this talk now to some of those concerns that we all have. Okay, so I've asked my wife, Maria, to actually hand out an index card to everybody. I'll give you some instructions. It's very brief. This is anonymous, pero na erenda, okay? So just remember that. This is a little bit of an activity. Please, Achin, this is a conversation. We actually, to be honest, we need more men in here one day to have this exact conversation I'm going to have. Unfortunately, women bear the burden of the health of the family. It's not a great situation we have here, but it's the truth at least now. And so I invite everyone to be a part of this. So the first thing, as you get your card, you'll need a minute to think of this. I want you to write the person, I don't mean the name, like the relationship. Ammeano, brotherano, children. Who influences your health decisions the most? It could be a website. It could be a WhatsApp group. It may be a person of a relationship or a friend. And I'd like you all on one side, maybe the side with the writing, the lines on it, and then I'll have a different for the other one. And so again, the request is for you to write the relationship or the resource of the person who influences your personal health decisions the most. And if you're not sure who that is, pick up a scenario. If I have a question, I think something is wrong, where do I go first? Do I look online? Do I tell my sibling, my sister, my children? That's probably the person who influences you the most, okay? Second question, I didn't give it yet, so that's the first one. Other side, up at the side, on the other side, flip the card over. On that side, I want you to write the health concern that is most of concern to you. I don't mean concern to the community. I don't mean concern to your spouse. I mean concern to you. And I want you to pick, you don't have to write the person, but maybe it's not even your concern for you. A lot of our women actually think about somebody else first. They're thinking about their husband's health. They're thinking about their child's health. So pick someone whose health, that topic. So it could be diabetes. Maybe it's cancer. Maybe it's thyroid problems. It doesn't have to be an endocrinologist problem. I'm in internal medicine, and there's other things I can speak to. But my point is for us to share. This is an interactive opportunity for us to say, what is the health concern? And this is probably very much based on your age and the exposure of other problems that people have brought, that they have in their life as well. Welcome. So you still have a minute to join us. If you don't, Maria's gonna collect this in a minute. On one side, the side with the lines, you're gonna, if you want, you're welcome to write the person or resource that influences your health the most. Again, that's brother, sister, parent, not their name, or resource. The other side, you're gonna write the health concern you're most thinking about. Okay? it could be about yourselves, but I did warn people that sometimes they don't think about their own health, they're thinking about their spouse's health. I've seen many women sacrifice their health for their husband, unfortunately. So if that's where your concern is, then you write that concern. The medical problem is my question, though. Sorry if that was the thing. Okay. So I'm going to give you one more minute, and then we're going to get into a conversation about it. Maybe I'll have you collect them, and then you can put them. Okay, as Maria collects those from everyone, I'm going to go over a few topics today. This is not supposed to be a lecture, because you can find that easily online in a YouTube video. This is supposed to be a discussion, and so I want to talk about two topics mainly. One is about metabolic syndrome, and the other one is diabetes, but not really what diabetes is. It's really about how we assess risk. You know, I think for our community, or just for anybody seeking healthcare, talking about disease process is useful from a theoretical perspective. But if you want to consider your health, you should do the same thing you do with everything else in life. Think about it based on risk, right? Constantly we're thinking about risk. If my child goes out, what could happen? If I don't wear my coat and it's cold outside, what could happen? If I go to work and I say too much, speak up too much, what could happen, right? We're always constantly thinking about risk. So instead of thinking about disease, you should think about risk. My suggestion, because risk allows you to figure out what you're really worried about, and then what factors, right? Risk factors, those are the ingredients to the problem that you can think about. So, why do I bring that up? How many people know what metabolic syndrome is? But the actual, what it goes into that. Who knows what metabolic syndrome is? Not a test question, no shame. I didn't know what it was until I started doing this. The reason I'm going with metabolic syndrome first, and I saw that Auntie put it into the invitation, we're going to talk about that, is because I'm going to suggest it's far more important for you to know what metabolic syndrome is than diabetes. Both are important. But metabolic syndrome is a set of factors, a set of characteristics. When I name the characteristics, you're going to know a lot of people who have this, whether it's you or your family member. It's because it's in our community, really, and it's in the whole world, but definitely in the community. Metabolic syndrome is important to know because, you know, most of the time, let's say somebody calls you on the phone and says, oh, you know, somebody had a heart attack. And then what do they say? Oh, diabetes or that. That's immediately what they say, right? Already they're talking about that. That's not why they had the heart attack, though. They had a set of risks that raised their chance of that happening. So what are those risks? So metabolic syndrome is a collection of things. So I never remember it, but I'm going to remember it. The first one, and I think that I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking about that, is abdominal obesity. Abdominal obesity is a very difficult word because I think weight and the psychology of weight and the shaming of weight is a very big problem that we all bear, but it's not my point. My point is, when we talk about weight and diabetes or heart disease, it's not your total body weight that is actually the concern, right? So usually people will look on the scale and they say, okay, I have less weight. You know, that's some value to that. But when we're talking about cardiovascular health, we're really talking about abdominal obesity. So why is that? The weight we carry is different depending on where it is. I think everyone knows that. We're kind of a little bit, you know, we hear that. But it's actually a very important detail because some men and women are notice that they carry more weight in other places, right? Maybe the legs, maybe the butt, maybe everything, all these other places. Those risks are different than the abdominal obesity. So metabolic syndrome is an abdominal. So what is more riskier abdominal obesity? It's a little harder in our Indian community because we're a smaller group of people. So the American sizes that we see sometimes don't fit. But you know, about 90 centimeters is associated with risk for men, 80 centimeters for women. So I think that's about 31 inches. That's one risk factor. Second one is triglycerides greater than 150. Triglycerides are actually not that important by themselves. If you guys have looked at it, I won't talk about that too much, but we're talking about when it's connected to these other things. When you have all of these things, then you or your family member you want to be careful about. HDL, you all know what HDL is on the cholesterol panel? HDL, H is happy. That's what you think that H is for happy. That's the one you want a lot of that one to be high, or H is for high. So when that number is low in men and women, that's a concern. Blood pressure, that means 130 over 85 or on a blood pressure medication. And fasting glucose. So again, I didn't say diabetes, but a fasting glucose greater than 100. Now, many of you have heard these things. You go to the doctor, maybe you don't have these things, but most of the time these are considered in isolation. I have a cholesterol problem, I have an abdominal problem, maybe I have a weight problem, I have a blood pressure problem. They're in different buckets. So what is metabolic syndrome? Metabolic syndrome is saying that your risk of diabetes goes up 5 times, and your risk of a heart attack or heart attack stroke goes up 2 times if you have this. Now, hopefully many of you don't, and I'm glad if that's the case. But the knowledge of it is helpful because then we can identify risk. What risks now can we reduce? When you reduce your risk of metabolic syndrome, you're reducing your risk of heart attack, stroke, diabetes. Now, I'm going to pause there 1 second, and I'm going to see, am I being clear so far? Anyone have any questions so far about what metabolic syndrome is? Just a definition, really, all I gave, right? So, what do we know about metabolic syndrome? Actually, there is a lot more data about Indians and healthcare, or diabetes and heart disease, both in the US, UK, and in India. There's a lot more research. Actually, I did a project like this about 10 years ago as in residency, and I didn't get that much data. The data was being arranged there. A lot of the publications happened in the later 2000s. So we have actually a lot of information, even information from Kerala, people who lived in elsewhere, and people who lived in the United States. So it's actually good information. What do we know about metabolic syndrome? It is rampant in Kerala and in people from Kerala who live in the United States. Very big problem. Some cities in Kerala have the highest rates of metabolic syndrome across India. So many of us who live here, it's a wonderful place. Sometimes you feel a little distant from that, but actually when you evaluate those same people in the US, we're no different. So that's one thing we have to be quite aware of. I'm going to speak a little bit more to that, but I'm actually going to talk a little bit about, since I'm talking about trends across places. Yes?
Quick question. Did you say the risk goes up for heart disease or heart attack by 2 times?
Heart disease is all on a spectrum with heart attack. So heart disease sometimes will be thought of the risk of getting a heart attack, but usually it's heart attack goes with that. Any cardiovascular disease usually also risk of stroke too. Yeah. What do we know about diabetes in Kerala? Lots of it. What do we think about diabetes across states in India? Where's the highest prevalence? Yeah, I mean, it's because we're talking about it, that's why you knew the answer, but for many of you who lived in other parts of other states in India, I know many of you have, sometimes we have that. Like growing up, we would always associate it with the Gujarati community. That's false, right? I mean, it may be back then, but we always think they're eating this laddu and all this stuff. That's not what's happening. We're eating it too, right? But the point is, there's a term called the Kerala paradox. Kerala paradox? Okay. This is super interesting, I think. If you look at most states in India, and cities in India, who do you think has the highest prevalence? So that means, really the amount of people, really, who have diabetes. The people who live in the city or the people who live in the rural or the country? You think the city, right? That makes sense. Many of you are probably from the city too, and you have a lot more food, access to different things. The Kerala paradox is opposite. The highest prevalence of diabetes is in the country time, not the urban centers. Right? I think it's very interesting. So I don't have a great answer. I have some theories. But does that surprise some of you to hear that? One of the reasons it surprises me is probably very similar to you. If you talk to your parents, if you talk to others, when you visit India, you always assume that the country people are the healthier people. They're working, they're laboring. I have not seen anyone in the country labor a long time because India has become so wealthy. Everything is carried out by somebody else. So your grandfather was working, but no one else after that generation, right? So probably, what's another factor that you guys think explains why people in the rural areas in Kerala have more diabetes than the people in the cities?
There
Food?
is no disparity between the rural and urban in Kerala.
And then?
There is no disparity between the rural people and the urban people in Kerala because there is no disparity.
Yeah.
The rural and urban disparity Kerala.
Yeah, it's much more seamless, right? You don't go from like here where you're going out Auburn to like Seattle. That's different. That's true and not completely true because the way they do these studies is.
But if you go to any North Indian states, it's very different.
Yeah.
The life in the rural and urban is very different.
That's fair. I will say that for any study or survey, they define what rural is, and usually it's based on the number of people who live in a certain area. So it's based on population size. Now that still matters because your access to food, your access to other things is going to be very different if you're living in Ernakulam versus if you're living far out. My family's in Rani, or there were. So there's some variation. So again, these numbers are not defined on what you think of as rural and cities. I know what the study population has defined, but it's a very good point. Another observation, anybody else have anything else?
Is a mechanism, like you said, our grandfathers who might have been farmers were eating a lot of rice, say, example, and then that trend kind of continues in the family, but the lifestyle has changed, so maybe
Yeah.
food habits.
Lifestyles change. I mean, if I talk to my mom would, and all of our mothers maybe, would say they did not have meat that often, mostly because of lack of that resource. I'm going to throw out one other idea that I think I haven't seen in the literature. That's because I think most of the literature is not done by Malayalis. I think it's done by other research groups. Some of the most data comes out of, for South India, comes out of Chennai, actually. But, India, Kerala has the largest expat a remittance economy, right? Remittance economy is sending back money. Now in America, most of you will probably stay and live here and all those things, but in many other parts of the world, people will eventually come back. So what have they done to their rural Dharwad? They're investing in that, right? So they're getting counted as rural people, even though the people, like their families are still in Kerala. They're in these places, new house, much more food, much more everything, getting people to cook it. So really who's rural is not really the people who are rural when they were thinking about it before. Do you know what I mean? So that's a little bit of a concern because, maybe to your point, Achin, is like what's rural is now not really, doesn't matter. The environment doesn't matter. It matters what your lifestyle is in your environment, right? So the Kerala paradox is actually kind of interesting because I think it makes us really remember that we might be thinking of our health a little bit differently. We might be attaching attributes to our grandparents and others a little bit more. Now, Kerala has the highest rate of heart disease, has the highest rate of metabolic syndrome among women more than men, actually. So that's something to be aware of. But, it's the issue all over the place. And again, even in here. So a couple stats for the United States, and then we'll talk about how to think about this for yourself as well. A little bit, some of this data is a little bit old now, but I think it's higher, if anything. Asian Indians in the United States have the highest risk for diabetes. That develops at a younger age. This is a perfect age group. Everyone looks pretty young to me. Okay, you're not like a teenager. You don't need to. That's when risk is low. 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, maybe too. Asian Indians have the highest odds of being physically inactive. I mean, possibly, there's communities where physical activity, I would say among, are women expected to be physically active? Yeah, of course they are. Do we see that happen to the same degree that boys are going out to play? Are girls kept inside? Are they encouraged to be in sports the same way? So we have to really think about what we really believe for our community here. Indians develop diabetes about 10 years earlier at a lower body mass index. So I'm always some of my patients talk to me and they come and they're from different communities, I'm very careful that what's defined as overweight in the United States is 25, BMI of 25. So BMI is your body mass index, so basically your height to your weight in a proportion. And obesity is defined as over 30. The World Health Organization has said, well, that doesn't really apply to large parts of the Asian continent. And so you may want to consider that 23 is actually more predictive of that. So you know, I don't need you guys to worry so much about what it is. The idea is here, let's think about risk, and then you can, you know, you're gonna work over your lifetime to figure out how to lower risks. And then finally, I had mentioned this, but this is the term you might hear, visceral adiposity. Visceral adiposity is this weight here, as measured by waist circumference. We don't do that enough in US healthcare. We don't actually go to the doctor. What do you get? Your height, weight, blood pressure, pulse. There's actually a recommendation, and this won't happen usually because it's a little harder. You need someone to measure correctly. You have to measure from the right place, like where above the hip bone. And that's to include waist circumference as a metric when you're doing your vitals. So these are some important things to know about it. Now I'm going to give a practical risk score we're going to go over. Before I do that, Maria, I'm just going to ask you, do you have those organized in any way?
I just wrote down what the most
Okay. So, you know, let's do a little guess, this little trivia. You can't get it. I have the answers, but what do you think most people are concerned about for as a health condition or a health topic? Yeah, weight was the most. Weight management. At a different topic, if you want, I'm happy to speak a little bit more to that. Today's to really understand risks in general. The second one is, what do you guys think? What did you say? What did the other one? Diabetes. Actually, cholesterol, I don't know if this was in order, just the number of, was there a pattern after that, after the most? Yeah. Cholesterol, cancer, and diabetes. So as a church, if there are more health talks that you invite other people, remember these are the things that people want to hear about. I'll tell you, if you want to hear about it, your husband probably wants to hear about it, or your children, or your spouse too, in some way, or your family members. Cholesterol, cancer, diabetes. Okay, who are the people who influence your health decision? I think I said decisions, or how you think about your health the most. I'm actually surprised by this a little bit. Husband, parents, or children. I have only my anecdotal thing. I've never found that many of our men to be bearers of health knowledge, to be honest. I don't know if that's so. I'm a little surprised to see that. But maybe I asked you, like, whose health you're most concerned about. So it could have been that my question was not clear. Yeah. Was that what I said?
No, and I think that there are some people also said.
Oh, okay, that could be it.
But like, I think
Yeah.
it came out both ways.
So these are all relatives, actually. I find that interesting. You know, that is a good thing. It's a good thing to get our health information or influence, which is really what the question was, right? Like, who do you get it from? Your husband, parents, or children. I definitely recommend finding your health information from some of the healthier resources. So if your husband and your children and your parents are very healthy, that might be good. You know? So like, you know, one could say that you do that for your spiritual information, right? Where do you get your most spiritual influence from? So health information probably should come from those places. And if you can't seek it in your family, that may not be your best option. But another point to this is that there are a lot of resources out there, and there's too many. It's really hard. You talk to one person, they say do this. You talk to another person, coconut oils used to be deadly, now everyone's saying it's okay. Like, how do you make sense of all these things? You know, the truth is information changes a lot, and you do have to keep in touch with it, but it's good to have healthy contacts and healthy resources about it. All right, so how do we think about this, though, for ourselves? And I also said, you know, I have to actually correct myself. I think I asked whose health are you most concerned about? So maybe that's what it was. Sorry. Husband, parents, and children. Okay, good. How are we going to, let's take the topic of metabolic syndrome, or I'll focus on diabetes. What should you be thinking now? Let's take you think about your husband or your oldest child. You're saying, okay, I went to this health talk. They said I have to do this. They said I have to do that. This is how I have to be healthy. But like, what are you actually looking for? So There's 4 things that I'm going to talk a little bit about. This is actually not something I made up. This is called the Indian Diabetes Risk Score. So if some of you haven't heard that, maybe you guys have done it before. It's really just a calculator. You probably have done it before. These calculators for risk are helpful. They are not diagnostic. So what that means is you don't get a diagnosis from this. You shouldn't feel fear out of this. You shouldn't feel worry out of this. Depends on if it applies to you. And you use that to, again, assess, well, what kind of things can I think about? What changes can I make? I think I'm doing okay with time, right? Okay, the first category, you guys can do this in your head, okay? Don't worry, it's mostly for fun. So you get points. The higher the points, the higher the risk. All right, this is based out of a score of 100. If you're under 35, you get 0 additional points. So what does that tell you? People under 35, even in India, generally have lower risk based on age. Age adds risk after 35. So for those 35 to 49, you're going to give yourself 20 points. Okay? If you're over 50, you give yourself 30 points. Now, it's a little unfair because we all get risk with each decade. That's just how God has it planned. Okay, I don't know how to say anything else, but so this score is a little bit probably more useful for those who are under 50. But over 50, you get 30 points. All right, next, waist circumference. If your waist circumference, and you can even do this thinking about the person you're most concerned about, whether it's your child, your spouse, do this math for them. Waist circumference is the next one. Waist circumference greater than 90 centimeters in a male, which is like their waist size. If you buy their pants, it's like over 34, right? 34, 35. Then you get, if it's under that, it's 0 points. If it's over that, you get 10 points. If it's way over that, meaning, let me correct myself. 0 points if it's under 90 centimeters. You get 10 points if it's 80 to 90. So that actually is a waist of like 33 to 35. Many men have a waist size of 33. Their belt size or whatever, and then and women I think have to be aware of that too. And waist over 90 centimeters in a female actually, or 100 centimeters in a male. So let's just make it easy. If you think if there's a waist concern in the person who's you're calculating for, give them at least 10 to 20 points. All right. Physical activity, regular exercise or strenuous manual activities. If you get regular vigorous exercise, you can measure that in many different ways. Most standards now are 3 to 4 times per week of 30 minutes of high intensity exercise. That means you are breathing hard and sweating. If you're doing that 3 to 4 times a week, you don't get any additional points. That's good. That's protective. If you have only moderate exercise, you can define that how you think, multiple times per week. So you're not getting that much of a burn, right? Burn, what I mean is burning calories. But you're active, you only get 10 points. Regular, mild exercise. What's mild exercise? Walking's unfortunately mild exercise. It's very important, and it helps with glycemic targets. So you shouldn't think that that's a waste. It's a wonderful thing. The question is, how much does it lower your risk compared to other things? So keep walking if you do. Mild exercise, 20 points. No exercise. And I want you to use an average week. No exercise. Not like sometimes. Think about it. If you didn't do it last week, that's what you want to use when you want to calculate this right now. And that you get 30 points. Okay? Last section. We talked about age. You get risk. Waist circumference. Physical activity. And the last one is family history of diabetes. No diabetes in parents, 0. One parent is diabetic, 10 points. Both parents diabetic, 20 points. I know without talking to any of you and just knowing my own family and knowing our community, there's risk out there. Now, this risk score was actually not made to tell people they have diabetes. Diabetes is going undetected, undiagnosed in our community, both in the US and in Kerala. Despite high literacy rates and one of the highest accesses to health care in the rest of the subcontinent, Indians still have some of the highest levels of disease. So it's not that everyone's getting screened, or we think that we are screening, if our child is okay, if our husband has been his death, but what are we thinking about, what's happening to everybody? So if you did your own score in your head and you have over 60, I believe the 60 is there, you have a high risk of having diabetes, actually, what that means. If your score is under 30, you have low risk, 30 to 60, intermediate risk. So what should you take from that? Let's say you did that in your head and you're a little bit, oh, why is this guy here? He's just telling me to be worried. I'm not. I'm telling you, knowledge is helpful. Having assessment of risk is really useful. And so I think if you think about, well, what can I do? Well, are you exercising? Is there healthier approaches to food and lifestyle that can help with weight? We're not going to get younger, and we're not going to change our parents' diagnosis. So there's two things we can't actually change, so don't worry about those. Just focus on what you can, and know that there's genetic risk that we have. Indians, for whatever reason, the data is not clear, but we have some genetic predisposition to have higher rates of diabetes, no matter you do everything right. So you don't want to feel the guilt. There's some things you just can't do. If you have multiple members in your family who have diabetes, and very few people have waist circumference, they are active and they're still getting diabetes, that's not because they're doing something wrong, it's because of there's a genetic component there. So be mindful of that. I am going to narrow down my points. Let me make sure I just covered everything, but I wanted to actually offer some time for some questions. There are other topics that go under this. You know, how do you think about healthy foods? I like to talk about food a little bit more now. There's, how do we understand the cholesterol panel? What should I talk to my doctor about? There's so many questions. That's beyond the scope of, a 45-minute talk where this has to be a fun day for everyone too. But there are a lot of things. So if you have those questions and things, there'll probably be some other opportunities to talk about them. But today really was just for us to understand the risk factors we should pay attention to. So don't go all the way to diabetes. You don't need to do that. If you don't have diabetes, don't jump all the way to worrying about diabetes. Instead, worry a little bit more about those questions that we talked about, right? Where's the family history coming from? What am I doing to be active? All those kind of things. Pay attention to that first, and then you can get to learn more later. But sometimes we wait to get something before we start to pay attention to it. And in our community, with the rates that we have, we cannot afford to do that in a healthy way. And many of you want to be around for a really long time to see your grandchildren, to see all these kind of things. And we want to encourage that in our community, despite us all having pretty comfortable life here, actually, right? Those are all blessings. People come to this to have that, and once we have it, what you find is we pick up some habits that aren't super helpful for us. Whether it's what we eat or how we active. And so we have an opportunity to help each other. I love this what was it called, a walkathon or something like that? Yeah, that was good. That's a start. But I would encourage you all to think about your children and their health differently going forward. When you see children who are very well nourished, that's usually a sign of, what is that a sign of, actually? What do you guys think? When you see children, I'm going to say teenagers and even small children, when a nice, I'll just use the word well-nourished child is there. What is that? Does that make you feel good? What do we think? No, I don't need to judge them. Yeah, they might be less active, but actually I challenge that. I don't know if people say that. I know that from my own personal experience that it's a good thing to be very well nourished as a child, to appear, whatever adjectives. Why is that there? Why do you guys think that's there? No, why do you think that is encouraged? It's actually encouraged, right? Yeah, why is that a positive thing? Why do you want when you go back to visit your family, you don't want anyone to see that your child looks skinny? Why? Because I don't know the answer. These are all judgments, but I will tell you what I think it is. I think that we have to remember how far India has come. And the 1991 liberalization of markets, right, getting much more access to other things, whether it's through utilities, whether it's different types of food, bringing in pizza, bringing in KFC, all these things to India. That's actually an economic thing that happened, right? We show, like, I can provide for my family. We have that. We're not starving. I mean, it sounds so silly, but it's a very true thing that we want to show, look what I can provide for my family. And I think we have to, as a community, not take pride in that. It is not a great thing for everyone to look so well nourished. And the habits you teach your children will be the habits that they carry for a really long time until they choose change, which is why I asked you, who influenced and whose health are you thinking about the most? So the best way to do this is modeling. You will frustrate somebody. Your husband will say, why are you making this food like this? And you'll say, you don't want to eat it? You can make something yourself, right? Maybe that works in your house, maybe it doesn't. But the point is modeling can be helpful. But the burden isn't on you, and that's what I just want to close with. Women have been the bearer of so much. So my mom is a very talented, smart woman who only looks at like everyone else's. That doesn't mean she's selfless. She's not selfless. The problem is she's associated so much of her responsibility to other people that her pride comes from making sure everyone else is okay. That's not a good thing, right? It's not a bad thing, but it's not a good thing. So she suffered a stroke at age 57. 57 is really young, right? She was working night shift. There's other stressors there too, but like she could not move her body the whole right side. She rehabbed for months. Fortunately, she's a very persistent woman. She actually fully rehabilitated. The younger you are, the higher chance you have a recovery. So she's done really well. She changed a lot of her habits, but still, I think that she was way more concerned about my dad's health the whole time. And you can't change people very easily. But my dad's health is great, And I think that that's a very common example in many homes. And so I hope you guys do take the time to take care of yourselves, take care of your children, but take care of yourselves first. Your children will see that. People are so influenced by what their mom does. So mommy's eating healthy, mommy's cooking healthy, mommy's expecting to exercise. They're going to see that. And it's going to actually be a little bit more powerful than when dad does it. Because dad's always out for something, right? Maybe that has to change too. But the point is, you have such power by taking care of your own health well. You are going to naturally influence the people around you. And so I wish you guys to do that. I think that's the last thing. So I'll just ask, what kind of questions do you have? And then I'll hand it over back to Andy.
Anybody has any questions? You spoke only about the fasting glucose.
Yeah.
What about the glucose levels after 1 hour and 2 hours?
So fasting glucose is probably the better measure of, well, there's different types of measurements. There's fasting glucose is a measure of what your body's doing, without food, and then how well the insulin responds is usually a kind of 2-hour glucose. If you're pregnant, you check it at 1 or 2 hours, but all those tests are kind of testing something a little bit different. But the point is that you can use either of them, glucose 2 hours after eating, or a fasting glucose. They're measuring different ways in which the body is handling the glucose load. So after eating, how your insulin's working, but we need insulin working even when we're not eating. When we're fasting, your natural insulin's supposed to be working. So either of those could be impaired. It's called impaired fasting glucose is a common one. So there's not only one way, I guess, is my question. Many of you guys are familiar with the A1C, hemoglobin A1C. It's not a perfect measure. Sometimes people are not getting picked up with their diabetes by hemoglobin, and it's their fasting glucose or their 2 hours. 2-hour postprandial glucose, which means 2 hours after eating, is done a little bit less often. It's probably because it's less convenient to do it, and people aren't thinking about it that way. You can always come into your doctor's office having not eaten, so you'll get a fasting glucose. But to time a glucose, 2 hours after eating, it's a little bit different because you have to have a glucose meter. You're probably not going to be at your doctor's office then. So it's a little bit more about the practicality. Does that make sense? Yeah.
So the fasting, are you saying the fasting is more, so HbA1c is the average, right, so which one is more like reliable?
So my point is that it's not that anyone is more reliable than the other. They're all telling you something different about glucose metabolism. The reason A1C is the most popular is because it's so easy. You don't need to be fasting for it. It's studied across international populations. There's, so the reason that the tool is very helpful is because it's so ubiquitous, it's so used so much. But it's not, they're all measuring something different because glucose is always moving around, yeah.
Because the reason I'm asking is my parents usually, like for many years, maybe 2-3 decades, their fasting is always like 104, 106. But their HbA1c always comes back like under 6.
Yeah.
So what does that kind of
So
indicate? I mean,
it
and with your question about parents having diabetes or not, accept them. Like my dad's 4 siblings and both my grandparents had it.
yeah.
But he somehow does not have the HbA1c ever elevated. So, but his fasting is always a little elevated. So what does that really?
Yeah, I think what that's telling you is that he has a little bit of, he has a slightly impaired fasting glucose. So he has some dysregulation of his glucose. So he doesn't have to have fulminant diabetes to still get risk. And that's a really good example. He could have metabolic syndrome. So he could have a higher risk of developing diabetes or higher risk of a heart attack or stroke because he has enough of these factors in there. So a little bit of higher glucose at fasting, find out what his triglyceride is, look at his age, see what his abdominal, and then you can say, well, it doesn't matter, you don't need to have diabetes to have risk. And that's what you should think about. Again, so you have these different tools out there. It's just the A1C is very easy. A number, okay, 6.2, 6.5, 5.9, you can, okay, done. I have to see you next year, doctor, bye. That's helpful, because it's better than nothing, but they're measuring different things, okay? So it gets a little bit more complicated then, but good question. Anything else?
When we think of healthy eating patterns,
Yeah.
can you share your thoughts on whether women should consider intermittent fasting? I've heard some contradictory views that intermittent fasting in women can affect hormones. So what would you think?
That's a great question. There's still a lot of that's not probably entirely clear about intermittent fasting when it comes to hormone function, because it depends which hormones, and it also depends on age as well. So I don't think I have any great information that intermittent fasting is bad for your other health, your endocrine health. If you're premenopausal, postmenopausal, there's nothing that I've seen anyway that says that you should do that. I think the thing about intermittent fasting, is everyone familiar with intermittent fasting, right? I always kind of ask people, intermittent fasting is what people just used to do before they had access to food and cabinets with all this snacks, right? There's usually you keep your stomach, gastrointestinal tract empty for 4 to 6 hours before the next meal, right? Now, they've stretched that and they say, well, intermittent fasting is like eating nothing, right? There's many types of fasting. I think what my point I want to make is, really what everyone is trying to do is they're just trying to have some control over how many calories they take in. And the only way to have control how many calories you have to take in is by not taking in that many calories, right? So intermittent fasting is just saying, like, I'm going to eat less. Now, you could do the same thing by eating smaller meals a little bit for the total amount. It might be a little different. You don't want to eat so frequently that you don't have time to clear it. But I don't think there's I think if that's the way you want to do it, that's a good thing, but it has to be sustainable. So intermittent fasting for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, what happens if you stop that? Right?
So the
Yeah.
question is, like, a lot of times with this intermittent fasting, people are not, like, totally skipping breakfast and going straight to lunch, like with the 16 hours or whatever.
Yeah.
So, but we grew up kind of like with the idea that the breakfast is the more important meal,
Yeah.
So what is your take on that, like skipping?
Yeah, again, I think you'll hear so many views of this, and I would say that the simpler way to think about it is, how many calories am I trying to take in today? If I want to split this amount over breakfast, lunch, and dinner, then I need to be aware of my portion size and what's going on. That might be better for me. It might be better for my mental health to not be thinking about this and to have my regular meals. Regular meals you get to do with family too, right? So you don't necessarily want to be the one that's not. So you have to think about it at different levels. But I think the simpler point is, do I want to have a calorie goal? And if for me and my willpower, is it easier if it all goes into one meal? Or am I comfortable being very intentional and having 3 meals? There's no such thing as breakfast is the best. You'll hear theories. I think it is because I like to think it is, because I like breakfast. But it's not probably because I have a scientific reason for it. I will say this, our bodies adapt. So anytime you make a big change, if you're really hungry, that's what's supposed to happen. That's not you hurting yourself. But if you're able to sustain it, your body will realize your stomach gets smaller, frankly. That's what bariatric surgery is. You're just making a stomach smaller. You can do that actually in some ways by just getting used to smaller quantities. It takes a little while, but it gets there. After a while, you're like, I didn't even want that other piece. You know how many times you've eaten something like, I didn't need that extra pile of jor, right? You just took it. It's good. So it sounds so good. I didn't need that extra kashnam of chicken. I ate it. I didn't want to throw it out, right? So you don't need to do it. So it's hard for all of us, by the way. I don't think that that's exclusive to women. But anyway, thank you so much. I appreciate this time, and I look forward to interacting with you in church. We both do. You'll see our kids too, and I hope to meet you guys more. We'll be here for a little bit, probably through lunch, and then we won't stay for the rest of it. Our son has a soccer game. But thank you for your time. Thank you, Andy, for calling. I actually meant to tell you, if you are interested in some books, there's some great South Asian writers that a little bit health focused. Lady Doctors. Has anyone heard of this by Kavita Rao? She has written, especially for families, especially for your young daughters, but for everyone. These are some of the first women in India who became doctors. As you know, they were not really allowed to be doctors for a long time. One of them is our very own Malayali, Mary Lucas, Mary Kunan Lucas, I think her name is. She was the, one of the first Surgeon Generals in Kerala, actually, so elected. Fantastic book, amazing. This one, if you're interested in health, is from the genetic side. Tony Joseph, have anyone heard of him? He's a journalist in India, obviously Malayali, but based out of Delhi. He wrote this book, Early Indians, about our genetic history, which is fascinating. And then I just brought this other one because it reminds me of women in our community, but it's not. It's by Perumal Morgan. Has anyone heard of him? Yeah. He's a Tamil writer. A lot of his work is translated in Malayalam as well. This is the English version, but it's a book, short stories about Marthoma, and it's about his mom. It's a beautiful book. It reminds me of actually my grandmother, my auntie. But there's just some great writers out there that I thought reminded me of why I was coming today. So if you have any, if you want any suggestions, let me know. Okay? Let's try to look at some of them.
Thank you, Dr. Rajesh and Maria, for the valuable information. I think they're trying to get it tonight.
Oh, that's
Shani. I don't know why.
many similar
I
writers.
called him also Rajesh, because I don't know Indian Rajesh. So, for the valuable information, I don't know any Rajesh.